Are you an overwhelmed SaaS founder ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those you don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where AI is transforming how we work, think, and build. And some of us are still trying to figure out if we're using it to 10x productivity or just write slightly better emails. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is way more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. What if AI isn't just a tool you plug into your business, but a reason to redesign the entire thing? Most companies are sprinkling AI on top of existing workflows, hoping for marginal gains like faster emails, quicker reports, slightly better automation. But what if that's the wrong approach entirely? In today's episode, we explore a far more radical idea, using AI to rethink how work actually gets done. You'll hear why incremental improvements, what some call AI magic dust, rarely lead to meaningful transformation, and how the real opportunity lies in letting AI take over entire classes of tasks, freeing humans to focus on higher value work. Yet we've all heard that, but how do we do it? Well, we're going to find out today as we hear about a powerful mental model for modern organizations, the octopus. And you know I got to love that, right? Not in a weird sci fi way, but as a blueprint for distributed intelligence, teams empowered with context, making decisions closer to the action instead of waiting for approvals from the top. This conversation digs into how this shift changes leadership, speeds up execution, and breaks down the silos that slow down companies. If you're thinking about AI as just another tool in your stack, this episode may challenge you to think way bigger about structure, decision making, and what your organization could look like if it were rebuilt for adaptability from the ground up. Let's dive in. Our founder on Tuesday was Nikki Barua, CEO and co-founder of Flipwork. She reminded us that transformation isn't just about adopting new technology, it's about letting go of what no longer works. She shared why reinvention requires courage, how to make bold decisions without perfect information, and what it takes to move from incremental growth to exponential outcomes. And our expert guest last week was Mike Collins, CEO of Alumni Ventures. He broke down why starting small is often the smartest path to growth. From focusing on a tight niche to embracing rapid iteration, Mike showed how momentum is built through learning, not perfection. If you missed either of those episodes, go check those out. Give them a listen. My guest today is Steven Wunker, Managing Director of New Markets Advisors and one of the leading voices on innovation and AI-driven transformation. He has spent years advising companies, including dozens of Fortune 500 organizations, on how to actually unlock growth, not just optimize what already exists. He is a multi-time best-selling author, and his latest book, AI and the Octopus Organization, Building the Super Intelligent Firm. I'm going to talk about that today. And you know I love the octopus, right? Welcome someone who's helping companies move beyond AI as a feature and start redesigning how they operate altogether. Steven Wunker. Hey, Steve, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thanks for having me.
We've worked in public service consulting, startups, and even helped create one of the first smartphones. Pretty cool. When you look at AI today, what feels genuinely different this time?
Well, look, I think this is the biggest thing that we've worked on in our lifetimes. And as you mentioned, I was in on the ground floor of smartphones, 1999. This is bigger. We've actually worked in AI since 2012, so pretty long period of time. The technology promise has always been there, but we're now just seeing the take up in organizations, not just the breadth of it, but the depth in terms of changing strategies, changing the way organizations work and the roles within them. That's what's really exciting to me. We're at an inflection point that we're probably never going to see again in our lifetimes.
Absolutely. And I think that's really interesting observation. I mean, smartphones definitely changed culture. I mean, pretty much everything that we do, the internet did the same thing, 10 years before that. And this, I think, is a similar way, certainly changing culture, changing the way we work, but on, maybe times 10, maybe times 100, who knows? But it's definitely a big deal in culture.
Yeah, look, that's the subject of the book, and I know we'll get into it. This is not a technology book. There's plenty of books on the tech of AI. And honestly, the tech changes so quickly that writing about it is sort of a fool's errand, right? You're going to be out of date the moment you're in print. About
Sure.
how AI changes or should change the way we organize and work. Unlike really any technology, certainly that we've seen in our lifetimes, probably really since the printing press.
That's big. You've been doing AI work since 2012, super early in the process. So, what do you think changed with generative AI that turned steady progress into what you call the Cambrian explosion, which is a great term for that?
Well, look, a few things, right? The applicability to new use cases really exploded. You didn't have to have this ocean of training data. It's always helpful, but you didn't need to have that. And you didn't have to really have the guardrails and process that you would go through to make AI commercial scale in ways that computer vision, for instance, or some sorts of predictive analytics might need. You also had this ability to deploy it very rapidly and easily to situations. So we could get a lot more grassroots adoption. Now, look, I think people have underestimated the back end costs of AI adoption. And there's often a lot of hidden costs, whether they're financial or in terms of work processes or just the time burden required to really make AI work well. But still, the barriers to entry in AI are quite low, and the applicability is so broad that it is really different than it was 10 years ago.
Most hunters see AI as a tool for productivity and maybe replacing some people or enhancing people's skills. Well, why do you believe that framing dramatically underestimates the real impact on organizations?
We could treat AI like some sort of magic dust that on top of what we're currently doing. And we'll get these marginal efficiency or usability improvements. And look nice, let's do that when it's easy. But that's not going to fundamentally change how organizations work. AI has this ability to take over certain tasks entirely, not necessarily replacing jobs, but replacing elements of jobs, which humans wouldn't do because they were just too tedious and time consuming, shouldn't do because they're not the best use of their skills, or can't do because the volume of work would just be overwhelming to the average person. So when we take that broader lens about what AI really can accomplish that perhaps we couldn't accomplish roles before, then we not only need to redefine the roles, we need to redefine how people relate to each other in a broader organization. That's when AI gets really transformative and revolutionary, not magic dust, but when it precipitates a rethinking of the way we get work done.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's certainly not the first time this is happening. PCs being introduced into the workplace changed the job functions. You go back to the turn of the century, manufacturing, automation replaced a lot of those job functions, and the jobs didn't go away. They just changed to a different form. And I think in a lot of cases got more interesting. And we're seeing that same kind of transformation again, the grunt work that we don't want to do. AI can do that very easily. And we can really focus on the higher level task, the thinking, the creativity, the personal interactions that really need personal attention.
Jeff, one of my first bosses couldn't type. He dictated everything. He was really old school. And so he had a typist. And, eventually I think he did learn how to type after I worked for him. But, the nature of what the assistant did changed, but the need for an assistant did. And the did changed as well, right? I don't have a typist, but I've got plenty of work to be done, even though, the computer is a pretty good partner of mine. So a lot of us are going to be like that, right? AI takes the stuff off our plates that we shouldn't really be doing in the first place, but there's plenty of higher value work to be done.
Let's talk a little bit about the book. In it, you use the octopus as a metaphor. You use that as a metaphor for the AI-powered organization, which I think is absolutely brilliant. What is the problem in modern companies that analogy solve better than traditional org charts?
So we gravitated to the octopus because it's got this weird biology. It has
Yes.
9 brains. It has one central brain, and then it's got a brain in each of its arms. And that means that each arm can sense and think and act on its own. So one arm's opening up a clam, another's a cave. And that frees up the central brain to think about the big strategic issues, like what do I do about that shark that's coming my way? And each arm can be doing this stuff while knowing what all the other arms are doing. There's a nerve ring that connects actually all of the arms. So there's contextual awareness. So an octopus is a real life analogy for what distributed intelligence looks like. 2/3 of the neural tissue in an octopus are not in its head. It's actually throughout the body. This enables it
That is
to
it's pretty
act in
amazing.
massively parallel fashion, to think and react super speedily, to focus on the important issues, and to be really coordinated when it needs to be because it has that full contextual awareness. So that's what we need to gravitate to.
Very different than old school org charts that are very hierarchy driven.
The problem I think we have is that for 40 years, people have talked about devolving authority and de-siloing organizations ever since books like In Search of Excellence back in the 1980s.
Sure.
And, it hasn't really happened. Well, so there are 2 reasons. One reason is something we've still got to be conscious of is that humans don't like to give away their authority. So that's an important
Right.
issue. But the second issue is that people more towards the front lines haven't had the contextual awareness to really have devolved decision making. But AI changes that. It can get the right information to the right people at the right time so they can make more important decisions on their own at the front line in real time and know about what's going on in the rest of the organization as all this plays out. And then, moreover, they don't necessarily have to keep asking permission of the people above them because AI gives visibility to what's happening at the front line as well to the folks higher up in the organization. So rather than always having to grant permission, they can instead veto things in much more close to real time. So if things do sort of go off the rails, they can arrest that before it really gets out of control. So it enables organizations to be much more quick and adaptive. Another reason we gravitated to Octopus is that it is a hyper adaptable creature. That's actually its biggest natural advantage in defense. The octopus is about 300 million years old. That's 70 million years older than the dinosaurs. And it has survived when 99.99999% of the species that came into existence have perished. And it does that because it is so darn adaptable. We need to be like that.
I love that. And that adaptability is one of the most important skills that people can have today in today's work environment. And as the market continues to change and evolve, it's really up to us to change with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a chapter on the personal approaches you need, but it works at an organizational as well as a personal approach. Critically, this is not just a CEO book or CEO argument. If the CEO is bought in, that's excellent. But it doesn't have to be that way. It can be at the head of a department or the head of a team or of a sales organization. You can exercise these principles at all sorts of levels. Doesn't have to be a Fortune 100 organization to make it happen.
Oh, that's definitely good to know. But I think that it's really applicable for those large organizations, but also for smaller companies that are more agile anyway. Making sure that the people inside there, that they're hiring people that are agile. And the same thing is true for the large companies, is really hiring that workforce that is agile, that can adapt, that isn't just stuck and looking for ways to adapt and improve and go with the flow.
I was talking last week to a group of product managers from about 100 SaaS companies. And we had a really good discussion about how is AI changing their role day to day. And, I think at many companies, particularly smaller companies, it really is leading together responsibility, right? So the PM can be more like engineering, or they can at least mock up some prototypes quickly and get that over to UX and get to consider things. Engineers can be more cognizant about what's going on in the rest of the organization. They don't need the PM to always be that information processor. So this is a good thing, actually. It's a little messy and it's going to take some transition. But to the extent that we can really get the full context of the other roles, we can move faster, we can be more adaptive, we don't get things lost in translation, we build better products.
I like that. Well, using the octopus and just something you said a minute ago, just about decision making and pushing that down to the front lines or making it accessible to the front lines, probably a better way. That distributed intelligence. How does AI enable the same kind of decision making, inside SaaS companies without descending into chaos?
So that's where the human discipline comes into this a little bit. Let me talk by analogy here. In 1900, a Navy captain had a tremendous amount of autonomy. They could go out and get the orders and then basically go execute it as they saw fit. And by 1930, that autonomy had almost entirely vanished. And that happened due to one form of technological progress, which was the radio. Because the admirals could give orders, they did. And that's a human tendency, right? If we can boss people around or meddle in the work, we do. And so I think your question points to a danger we've got to navigate, right? As the lines start getting a little bit more fuzzy between functions and between different levels of the organization, as information flows much more fluidly, you can see what everybody is up to. There need to be new ways of working. If we just go layer onto the org chart, that's really missing the way work processes are changing or need to change. We need to deconstruct the work and think about what Microsoft calls the work chart as opposed to the org chart. How does the work really flow through the organization? And that's often cross-functional in a modern organization. So that's the real representation of work. And where does AI get to be involved? What are the decision rights at each element of that work process for the individuals involved? What are the risk boundaries beyond which you shouldn't go? Those things need to get delineated to really make this live up to its full potential.
That's really helpful in thinking about it that way. It's really, really good insight.
It's radical, and yet it's actually what we do today, but it's just implicit in how we behave, right? We don't operate like,
It is.
I'm in this cone, I can't interact with that cone. No, that's not how work happens. But if
Right,
you look at
right.
the chart, it doesn't show that at all. So if we really want to rethink how we get stuff done, if we really want to get the most out of AI, we need to think about what reality is and then map that and map how it changes. It takes some work, and you can't do it for the whole organization all at once. You got to do it workflow by workflow. So you pick a half dozen, you do those. You get that embedded, you move on to the next half dozen, tranche by tranche. That's how real change happens.
Makes sense. And you mentioned talking with product managers and taking pieces one at a time. And I think a lot of teams adopt AI maybe one use case at a time. And how does that approach either increase or decrease complexity?
So I think it's fine, but it's very incremental, right? And oftentimes you're layering AI onto existing functionality. So maybe you remove a little friction, or you put a little magic wand in the corner of the screen or whatever. And that's nice, but it doesn't really rethink the work. An academic at Cal Berkeley, Sangeet Paul Chowdhury, has written a book. It's complementary to ours, came out at the same time, called Reshuffle. He just published something in Harvard Business Review where he looked at Figma versus Adobe. So Adobe knew about the need for collaboration tools, and yet it was Figma that really cleaned up. And it did that because it reconsidered the work. It disaggregated work into elements that could be very reusable and pre-approved, whereas Adobe was still based on files that got passed around. And they didn't re-architect the fundamental nature of the work. And that's how it got to be sort of passé. Figma's a much more useful tool in productivity. We run both, but we typically use Figma, not Adobe. So we need to be like that, really reconsider the work. Otherwise, some other competitor, like the Figma to our Adobe's, is going to do that for us.
Without a doubt. I think Adobe had to buy, or at least try to buy Figma, because it's an absolute threat to their business because of that exact reason. They tried to add some things on top, but didn't rethink and really figure out, what is that next step? What does the next iteration look like? What do people need that we don't do? And how do we create that in a much more collaborative way?
Look, this was classic disruptive innovation. And it's ironic
Yes.
because the Adobe leadership is fans of Clay Christensen's work. As you know, I worked with Clay for many years. He coined the term disruptive innovation. The incumbents try to incrementally improve what they already have because that's efficient, that's the installed base, it's easier to upgrade, all of the usual decisions. And as Clay would say in the conclusion to his stories, and that company failed because they did precisely what we teach them to do at Harvard Business School.
Hmm.
So you've got to sometimes make a break. Not all the time, right? Not every moment is fit for disruption. This is a moment of disruption where we need to fundamentally rethink the nature of how people use our products, what competitive advantages, and how we internally do our work.
That's so good. And it's a lot harder than just saying, hey, we're gonna add AI to what we're doing now, because that might work for a little while. But I think you're exactly right. It's taking a step back and rethinking, how does this change the work? What doesn't need to be done anymore? What is it that can just be taken care of? And what is this? What is it going to create? How do people want to work? I mean, because this is there, what is possible now? And just taking a step back and rethinking the whole thing.
So I started out consulting in the late 90s at Bain and Company. And about half of our work was on companies that were navigating the internet transition. But, overwhelmingly, they were slapping the internet on top of what they were already doing. If you look at retailers, almost every legacy retailer failed in making the internet transition. They didn't
Yes.
rethink the word. Walmart succeeded because they did. Walmart, Kmart, that is a wonderful matched pair. Walmart really leaned into it. It was progressive, and now it's a $1 trillion valuation company. Kmart's dead.
Yeah. In that transition, Sears should have been the Amazon, because they had the Sears catalog for decades before that, and all that was printed internet, and all they had to do is just take that next step, but they missed out.
The irony of this, because Clay wrote about that example, Sears used to be the disruptor. They
Yes.
it was the equivalent of the internet. It was the U.S. Postal Service back in the late 1800s to create this great accessibility to products. So they
Right.
did it 100 years before, but they couldn't do it again, even though it was so analogous.
That's tough, and it's easy from the outside looking at that and saying, what were they thinking, or it was a mistake. I mean, we've got the 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 benefit of hindsight in seeing that, or even the Adobe example. Very, very smart people there. Uh, but it's easy from the inside. And do you think that's something that leaders, especially in larger companies, are just trying to not mess things up, hold on to the revenue? They don't want to disrupt what they have, for fear that the next thing might not work out as well.
So the AI disruption comes at a very unfortunate time when a lot else is getting disrupted, or at least is uncertain as well. And so the appetite for innovation tends to guardrail. It's a bit of a pendulum. Right now, a lot of companies are at the show me the money, let's do very near term improvements, and I want to see the results fast. I mean, okay, fine. You need some of that, obviously. But we also really need to think in a transformative way around AI. Otherwise, other people are going to do it for us. I think that's the worry that the markets have right now around software stocks. There is every right for a SaaS company that has a product, that has an installed base, that has data from customers, and has relationships, understanding of a customer's context. They have every right to win in the AI infused future. But they've got to think transformatively. They don't want to be Adobe in the face of Figma. I mean, we see it right there. That has played out for us in the past 10 years. And it would be
Right.
very easy to have that play out again in innumerable SaaS markets unless we really are bold enough to think transformatively.
Ready to dominate your market and skyrocket your revenue? Dive into Small Fish Big Pond, delivering a world class business that swims circles around competitors. This book is packed with powerful marketing and leadership insights guaranteed to transform your business and operate world class. Small Fish Big Pond delivers proven strategies to sharpen your marketing message, deliver unmatched value to your clients, and guide your prospects' buying journey to one inevitable conclusion that your company is the only solution for them. Inside, you'll find step by step frameworks and time tested growth principles to attract your ideal clients, convert them, and then turn them into your passionate brand ambassadors. Grab your copy today in print, ebook, or audio at smallfishbigpond.com or on Amazon. Plus, remember, every book sale supports charity. All profits go there. Always have, always will. So dive in and make a difference. How should leaders think about that in disrupting themselves and take those steps? What are the maybe the blocks or the things that they're not thinking about or maybe should think about differently in disrupting their own business or rethinking their business in order to essentially disrupt themselves to take that next step and rethink the work?
So I would give them three questions. How does the competitive landscape change? And by competition, let's think very broadly, right, in terms of DIY or things that people might sort of kludge together, as well as AI native startups. That's number one. Number two, what makes you special? There are things that would make an incumbent special, but what are those? And if you're an entrant, if you're a disruptor, what makes you special? That
Right.
changes in an AI world. And then number three is how do you get the work done? How do you organize? How do you manage? How do people interrelate? What are the behaviors? What's the culture that you need internally to succeed in an AI first world? Those are three really important questions. Answer those, and you'll go a long way to figuring out who you should be. And not like some far off vision of who you should be, but who you need to transform into quite soon.
Oh, those are great. Everybody should be taking notes and yeah, ask those questions on a regular basis, as the answers will change.
They will. And look, we need to be humble enough, right? We can't say and what the future is going to be in 10 years. I don't think any of us know. But we can
Right.
certainly see the trend arrows. Uh, and so
Yes.
that is enough to evolve into a future state pretty quickly. And one that probably has some optionality, right? That has the flexibility to keep on adapting. I think we've learned that in the software business through waves of change already, right? You want to have that optionality. I wrote a piece for Forbes recently about Upwork and how they re-engineered their stack, and they have an AI optionality layer where it is meant to just be very flexible about is it a small language model, a large language model, is it some other AI system that it plugs into, is it agents that work with Upwork. They know that they can't necessarily predict it, so they built in the optionality right into the system.
That's pretty smart. Yeah.
Smart and often not done. We should know better. And look, I've been guilty of this. I ran a software company in the boom, one of the early mobile marketing companies, and it's so easy to just charge in and make a bet. But that was a super dynamic space. It still is, frankly. But certainly at the early stages, it was changing on a weekly basis. And eventually
Right.
I realized I was a fool. We needed to create a system that was a lot more robust, that was changeable. And ultimately, what we did was we actually gave it to the customers so that they could fit it to their own use cases. So we ended up developing not a one size fits all solution, but a set of tools customers could use. It may well be that a lot of organizations migrate to that in the software industry as well. Not something, not a vibe coding, because, as Jensen Wong says, you don't want to go build a hammer. You'd rather buy a hammer. but
Right.
something that does have a degree of flexibility. Give them the toolkit, not necessarily the whole completed house.
I think a lot of companies would be happier because they want to have their own customization to be able to put their processes in. I mean, SAP implementations, classic example of that. But then you get to a point where it's so custom that they can't even upgrade. So there's got to be some sort of a balance there but if you build it like that from the beginning, where it's a toolkit, I think you're in a much better position.
That's right. And there needs to be that strategy upfront by the customers on what do they want and where do they need to be flexible. Otherwise, there are plenty of IT vendors that will talk them into these highly bespoke sort of solutions, which, to your point, like an SAP implementation, it becomes hugely expensive and inflexible and, frankly, a bit of a dead end. I think customers have learned enough through those sorts of failed transformations, the digital transformations of the past decade, that they don't want to do that again.
Right, right. Well, within transformations, the human element, and we touched on this a little bit earlier. Where do founders underestimate the behavioral changes required for AI to actually work inside the company?
So certainly the way people interact changes. The way they engage with AI is going to change as AI attains more capabilities and increasingly can act in an agentic way as well. A lot of employees and their managers often think that AI is just going to do the work, but that's not really the case. If you want good quality outputs, you need to
Right.
lean into it in a critical thinking sort of way. And this is a danger, right? Because we can't be like kids who I've got high school kids who they've got a lot of friends. I won't say that they do this themselves, where AI does their homework. And if we
Right.
do that, we lose our critical thinking skills really quickly, and we are going to get very subpar outputs. So, the way you encourage employees, the way you measure what is good work, and incent them to use these systems has got to be rethought. You need to give people a degree of psychological safety in using AI and embracing new ways of working, because there will be some iteration, and we have to accept that. We also have to recognize, I think, Jeff, that everybody in any kind of management position in companies needs to become a change manager. It doesn't matter how specialized your technical skill is. If you have people reporting to you, you are now a change manager. And those skills have often been confined to sort of like the high priesthood of change management in the C suite. That has to
Right.
change.
That's really good. And you've studied millions of workforce surveys. What are some patterns that show up consistently in companies that successfully adopt AI and do that change management versus those that stall out and become statistics of failed projects?
So we have a chapter in the book that explains what strategic serendipity is, meaning you change the odds. You don't necessarily fix the game that you always win, but you change the odds. And you do it according to a four-part formula that we derive from those surveys. We actually relate it to the word luck. So L is you leverage help. You can't be doing stuff all on your own. You actually have to become more connected, not less, with using AI, because the workflows are going to get more and more cross-functional. U is unexpected connections. You need to be open to the unexpected, particularly in a rapidly changing world. We can't just focus on the average case, right? We have to really think about the whole set of cases out there, because that creates capability. C is control chaos. Man, there's already chaos, and there's probably going to be more chaos in the coming few years.
Sure.
So we need to have systems for dealing with that as it comes in. That comes down to a very personal level. And then the K is a really important one, and that's know what's missing. It is a human tendency to focus on what's in front of us. But the more dynamic the world becomes, the more what's in front of us isn't going to be representative of the future. So we need to think about what's not in the data. What are we not observing? And try to work that into our calculations. AI is only as good as the data that's in it. So it's the role of the human to think about what's not in that AI system that needs to complete the picture. So luck, that will take you a long way.
That's really good and easy to remember.
Good.
So that's another writer downer right there. That's really good. That. One of the things that you distinguish between is high risk, high change AI use cases and low risk, high efficiency ones. And why is it that founders so often chase the glamorous use cases first?
Well, we want to prove everything that our systems can do. Uh, don't do that. That is often a bad business decision. Look, I've done that as a software exec. We had this big potential thing with Vodafone when I was selling mobile marketing software. It was a huge RFP, and ultimately we did win it. But they did like 50 different change orders, and the system wasn't anything like what we thought it was at the end of the day. And meanwhile, Malta Telecom just wanted a basic system to go do. And we should have prioritized that because that would have been super replicable, easy, cheap to produce, and then we could have built on it from there. But oh no, I was entranced by Vodafone. So you learn from your mistakes. And look, I've seen this mistake again and again. When IBM brought out Watson, they initially focused
Yes.
on cancer diagnoses, and they had this partnership with MD Anderson, which is one of the world's premier cancer centers based in Houston.
Yes.
And the oncologists at MD Anderson looked at this and said, well, I'm an oncologist at MD freaking Anderson. I don't need this. I don't need AI to tell me this stuff. I'm one of the best in the world. And so it was just an abysmal failure, and ultimately that got pulled. But where AI is proving very useful is recording conversations between doctors and patients during consultation, for instance. So the doctor isn't just typing on their keyboard and looking at their screen the whole time. They're actually engaging with the patient. They're practicing medicine rather than being a typist. That is a low risk use case that has actually very great returns. So we should be focusing on those sorts of situations initially.
That's so good. And I mean, both of those. One, just not having that right fit in the market for Watson, because it's one of those things that from the outside it's kind of cool, but just really mistargeted and wasted a good chunk of time where they had a competitive advantage in the technology. But then, I love that with the doctors, they actually get to do what they really love, and that's medicine, instead of, take notes or have an iPad or do all that technical stuff that they really don't want to do anyway. That's a great, great use
Right.
case.
Patient
W-
scheduling, reminders,
yeah.
predicting when somebody is going to get discharged. These are all real life health IT use cases. I had an article in Forbes today about how hospitals are adopting AI in like really here and now, and that's how it's happening. And look, eventually it moves into diagnoses, and already that's happening in certain sorts of high
Sure.
volume situations. But let's not force it into those really high risk, high value situations first. Don't make my mistake.
What are some of the most valuable AI use cases today that founders overlook because they do fall into that category? They're unsexy, they're operational. They don't have a lot of flash, but they do have a lot of value.
So, before I talked about the three questions, what won't humans do? Shouldn't they do? Can't they do? They won't take notes after every meeting they have and distribute them to all the attendees. They shouldn't be doctors typing on a keyboard for half of a consultation with a patient. They can't, and we did this last week, so it's top of mind. They can't take 120 people, break them into breakouts of 3 people each, and get word for word transcripts of what they say in all those breakouts about deploying AI in certain use cases, and then summarize all those transcripts and record what each individual's commitments were to undertake in the next 60 days. AI can do all of that. None of that is terribly glamorous. All of that is actually really important. So let's
Yeah,
focus
it's super
on
valuable.
that rather than what does customer, really think would be really cool or what would be a great demonstration of technology. Let's focus on things where obviously we want to be market driven, but then really focus on those three questions, applying that to what the market needs. And oftentimes it is unglamorous but very high value use cases that you wind up in.
I think sometimes sales is looking for those high value or flashy use cases because they think the product will demo better or they'll be able to get more attention. Or maybe somebody is even asking for it. But how do we balance the market information or the request from sales or customer demands or requests with the kind of the strategic direction of the product and what we want to do and how we're rethinking work? Because they may ask for something, but it's just like it's a faster horse. It's not a car. And what we want to create is what the new way of doing work is going to be like. What is the balance there?
I think the world is moving on from the really sexy but not terribly practical AI implementations. They're seeing that it's hard to work in practice. It's hard to get people to adopt it or customers to collaborate with it. Um, what they need to do is focus on things that have obvious utility, real value.
Mm.
That may require some customer education and change management. So you're really engaging with customers in a more in-depth way than you have before. And that is not the most efficient thing for sales to do, but that's how you win the game. Uh, I recall we looked a while ago at the market for OKR software, so objectives and key results, and how do you move people from organizations from KPIs to OKRs as a performance metric. And there's a company called Workfront that really engaged deeply with customers at the whole change management process. And they had a competitor that was very focused just on the software. And I saw just a couple weeks ago, Workfront bought that competitor. Even though the competitor, it's pretty good software, it was conceiving of itself as a software company, not a solution company. So you need to think a little bit more like Workfront. There's a SaaS company that conceived of itself as a solution company. And yeah, it meant sales was more labor intensive and took longer, and customer success was a much more important function. But it really worked. It was sticky and it created the value, and then that begat more sales. So that is how AI transformation really occurs. It's not through the magic feature, it's through thinking through that whole process of customer adoption.
But we want that magic feature so bad. We've chased that for so long. We're always one feature away from unicorn status. Just one more feature, just one more thing.
They're only as
That's
good
tough.
if they're adopted, Jeff.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I've built way too many things that were good ideas, but they were never adopted, and so they weren't such good ideas.
Yeah.
Well, looking ahead, say 5 years, what will separate companies that used AI to fundamentally reshape how they operate from those that merely layered it on?
So I think they need to ask themselves those three questions. How does the competitive situation change? What makes me special? And how do I work differently now? And to really ask it in a hard, meaningful way. They need to have a bit of a portfolio plan. So, look, I am not saying don't ignore the magic wands and the little features here and there. Yeah, you need some of that just to stay current. Um, but you also need the transformative things. The transformative things need to be prioritized because you can't do everything at once. But they need to have that there. There needs to be a degree of optionality that they embrace so that they are flexible enough as the technology changes or potentially as customer demands change. And then they really need to invest in the whole adoption process. That they're not just making the software, they're making a changed way of getting something done. And so that means customer success is probably more important. It means sales is different. It means marketing is likely different. It means you probably have to prove your economic value in different and very convincing ways. So it is not just a software business. If you think about it like that, though, there's a tremendous amount of value to play for. And it's the existing SaaS companies that really should capture that value, not the AI upstarts that are hungrily looking at it and have that flexibility of not being wed to previous approaches, but just don't have all the other assets that SaaS companies bring to the table.
So good. This is very, very helpful. The book, if people want to get that, AI and the Octopus Organization, building the super intelligent firm, and you got 6 other books or 7 as well. That's the latest one.
It's
Where can they
got the
find it?
best cover for people looking at this on video. It's got the best cover. It's got an octopus.
I like the cover. I think it's good.
Uh,
Well, where can people find it? And where can they find out more about you online?
So the book is on Amazon in all formats. The website for the book is aiandtheoctopus.com. That's actually a subdomain of our consulting company, New Markets Advisors. So you can find us there. And please connect with me on LinkedIn, Steven Wunker. Message me. I'd love to hear what you're cooking up, what questions you have. I do answer my messages. So connect and let's find out what you're doing.
Outstanding. We'll make sure and link all of that in the show notes, and of course, a link to the book as well. And Steve, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Super valuable today. Thanks for being on SaaS Fuel.
Oh, I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks again, Steve, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Steve and his company, New Markets Advisors, at newmarketsadvisors.com. And be sure to grab a copy of his latest book, AI and the Octopus Organization, Building the Super Intelligent Firm. It's really, really good. All links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. It's at Champion Leadership. And real quick, I just dropped 15 videos on why half the SaaS market is getting repriced right now and how to figure out whether you're building something that survives or just harvesting a dying model. It's over on our YouTube channel. It's called Future Proof Surviving SaaSpocalypse. So go check out that series. It's also linked in the show notes. You know, thought leaders share. Share this episode with the person who says we need to be more strategic whenever things get slightly unclear. Everyone who shares this week gets one brutally simple plan and zero ability to overcomplicate it. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of days I could use one of those. What do top sales teams, turnaround leaders, and high growth founders all have in common? Well, my founder on Tuesday is Brian Will. He'll answer that question and share lessons from building and scaling companies worth more than $500 million. And we'll also find out what it takes to sell, lead, and make better decisions under pressure. And also on Tuesday, in a SaaS Fuel First, we'll actually be doing a live stream with Brian from Startup Grind in Silicon Valley. We'll have Brian, maybe a few other founders as well. We'll talk live about what's going on out there at the competition. So follow me on LinkedIn for that, and we'll also live stream it on our YouTube channel. And then Thursday, what separates average salespeople from top performers? And can it be trained? That's a question we all want to know, right? Well, Jim Effner will be with us, and he is founder of the P2P Group. He breaks down the mindset, systems, and communication strategies behind consistent sales success. So I'll see you next time, and as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/saasfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.